So I'm really pleased to introduce Katherine Ellis. She's a program assistant for the American Press Institute, focusing primarily on marketing outreach and diversity initiatives. She's also a former Next Gen Radio Fellow and also spent time at USA Today Network, Wisconsin. Ellis is a graduate of the University of Utah, where she studied journalism, marketing, and public relations. While in college, she served as editor-in-chief of the Daily Utah Chronicle and spearheaded its transformation from a daily printed paper to a bi-weekly print digital-first publication. Please give a round of applause for Katherine Ellis.
Thanks, guys. So I want to make sure everyone has 2 of those handouts. So move up if you don't. I purposely made them closer to the front, so come on up. And then I need you to make sure that you're sitting next to someone because there will be a partner exercise. I know, I'm sorry. It's after lunch, you're tired, but if I have to be here, so do you. So come closer. All right, so I'm, like you said, Katherine, I work at the American Press Institute. They brought me on because they didn't have a point of contact for diversity and inclusion initiatives, which is something I'm super passionate about, and also to do their marketing. And you can talk to me about being the only person of color in the newsroom who's trying to cover a community, what that feels like, and also, I know a lot of you are students. I was just there, so if you guys want to talk to me about getting work after college, come see me after. We also have a fellowship. So, the American Press Institute focuses on 4 things. We're trying to help publishers grow and engage their audience, improve public service journalism, succeed at organizational change, and we also do a lot of research and reports. So earlier today, Evelyn set us up perfectly to talk about this. Like, we know public trust in journalism has declined. Trust in preferred news sources may have gone up, so it is a nuanced statistic, but we know it's gone down. But even worse is that underrepresented groups give extremely low marks to the accuracy of how they're covered. Not only are they not being covered, but when they're finally in the news, they feel like they're misrepresented. And this presentation is going to talk about how empathy can help journalists fix that. So a lot of our editors and leaders that we work with at the American Press Institute have felt like, I don't know what to do. It's not clear how I can fix this, but we have done a little bit of research with people who have found solutions. So one of the biggest things is that true listening requires humility. If you're coming into a beat where the person before you maybe broke the relationship, you have to come at it from a place of fixing and honesty and transparency and talk to them about how sorry you are that happened and you're willing to fix it. We had some research in the past year. We've really focused on listening, and when we talk about listening, we're talking about meeting your audience where they are. So 2 examples I'll share with you is in Tennessee, the Tennessean had 2 community groups come talk to them and explain their perspective. They had gun owners and they had Muslims in Tennessee. And then they had a bunch of stories produced out of those conversations. In Boston, there was a nonprofit newsroom that did something called a pop-up newsroom. It's a really low lift. They set up a table and had a typewriter on it to add a little panache, and then they just had members of the community come talk to them, and they were able to source stories that way as well. So listening to your community and providing opportunities for them to come to you, along with these things here. Something else that we've really been studying is empathy. So you guys have a handout with our tips for how to add empathy to your reporting, and there's also a link to the full report on the back. But these are things that we've really, really tried to focus on and prioritize in the newsrooms that we're working with. And what we found is that all journalists, not journalists of certain backgrounds, should be able to thoughtfully cover communities that don't look like them. And typically in newsrooms, we've seen that diversity and inclusion has fallen to women and journalists of color, and it is not women's work. It is not journalists of color work. It is everybody's work. And building a community of listening and empathy in your newsroom is the only way you're going to change the culture. Taking time to listen to members of these communities is the only way you're going to repair that broken bridge. And particularly with empathy, journalists have been taught to be objective, right? And so empathy in the sense of really taking on the feelings of the person you're talking to is something that journalists kind of stay away from, but we really believe that this is the key to fixing your coverage. So now it's time for a little bit of self-reflection. I need you to find the handout that says Culture Toss. And on your own, take just a moment to consider your own identity and the values important to you and just fill out the handout. I'm gonna give you guys another minute to wrap that up. Okay, so now that you've kind of thought about what's important to you, what you feel like makes up your identity, I want you to cross out one of those boxes. Which one is least important to you? And find a partner and exchange papers and read it without discussing it. Just switch. Wait, no discussing. Hang on, hang on. Don't talk about it yet. So just look at your partners and cross off 2 of their boxes. What do you think is least important about them? I know. Don't talk about it, don't talk to them. Just cross off 2 of their boxes. In addition to what they crossed off, you can't use one of theirs. What do you think is least important about them? No. 2 additional boxes, okay? No talking about it yet. Yes, so at the end of this, there should be 3 boxes on each person's paper that's crossed off. 2 are from the partner, okay? Okay, now return your partner's handout, and then have a discussion about it. How does that feel? What would you have crossed off instead? Okay. Shh. Okay. So, I'm going to open it up to share for a second, but I love every time I do this, everyone's like, what? No, there's no way I can judge anybody like that. I don't know anybody sitting next to me. And I love it because as journalists, we usually feel like we're not in a position of power, right? We're holding the powerful accountable. But our power lies in telling other people's stories. You, in your reporting, have probably crossed off someone else's box without meaning to, just by assuming your own personal bias. Oh, this must be important to them because it's important to me. This is what I want to be identified as. And so when we do this exercise, I really want you to think about how it felt. For me, I get really nervous because I'm like, what if they don't understand what's important to me? For example, my name is Katherine Ellis, and my mom's culture is super important to me. I would never cross off my name, so I would never cross off someone else's name. But when I've done this activity, there are people who don't care at all about their name. Doesn't mean anything, right? But because I'm assuming I understand them through my lens, I would never cross it off. And so if you guys are comfortable, I would like some of you to share kind of the conversation that you had, something that was really unexpected, or how you felt about the exercise. Yeah. Do we have a mic? Can we have a mic for them?
So when we first started doing the exercise, I don't know if you felt super nervous like I did. I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, I don't want to offend him by crossing something out and having to cross out my own. But one of the things that I thought was interesting that neither one of us crossed off our names or our ethnicity. And we kind of talked about how our names are so important to us and how, coming from, African slavery, it's like the name was the last thing that we want to give up, and that's all I have, and that's all I have to pass down. And especially from a male point of view, passing down that name can be more important than even passing down your language. We both gave up our language. And so in being Black is that identity and I keep going to passing those things down. My children aren't gonna learn what it is to be Black from anybody else, so to have to give that up just felt too strong to me.
Yeah, it was interesting, like I said, we both crossed out religion, language, and then the social issues, I guess, yeah. So, yeah, and like I said, none of us touched names and ethnicity, so it's really important, I think, to have people identify names, identify peoples, and
Yeah, it's interesting that both of you had similar things crossed off. Was there anyone who was completely opposite? Okay, did you guys, yeah.
We had opposite names. So I was just explaining how recently I've really been trying to embrace my name in its fullness. Because growing up, people would mispronounce it, and I would try, and I would get really frustrated, or I would just try to shorten it or something. I was like, no. And but then for her, I didn't want to cross off her name, so I crossed off race and ethnicity, and I didn't want to cross off a name and language because I was like, well, they're so tied together that perhaps those two could make up, and
And it did not.
It did not.
Right. So explain how that made you feel.
So for me, my reasoning was, well, I am made up of this whole experiences that my race and culture has brought to my life that's been passed down for my parents. So I'm like, if that's the same thing for him, I would never take away his Blackness, for example. And then I thought, well, he could still have the essence of his Blackness, even if his name is Justin or not. But that's not his name. I'm saying I can't just come up with any name and maybe I could come up with a way of calling him, but never an identity to associate him with. So.
Right, and something that's important, I know that, usually when you're going to interview someone, you have a list of questions you're gonna ask, right? Maybe change one of them to be, how would you like to be identified as? Some people, their career is really important. Some people, their name is really important. But you don't know that. You can do research. We live in an age where I can find out what you had for breakfast 4 months ago, but how am I supposed to know how you want to be represented if I don't ask, right? And so I think that particularly when applied to journalism, I want you to think about how this made you feel to have someone have the power to take away parts of you without knowing you, and then the power that you have to do that to other people with storytelling. This is why the relationships between reporters in the news and marginalized communities is so fractured, because we hold the power to them, right? And it's also not just journalists of color responsibility to report on these communities. I was in a newsroom where I was the only one who could speak the language. I was trying really hard to cover these stories, but I also had other interests, and my editors knew that. And so they let me report on other things, but they really relied on me to, be with this community. And so that struggle, I completely understand that, but I also wanted to do right by them. If they didn't want their race identified, I wouldn't. And so you need to consider empathy in your reporting. Think about how it made you feel, that uncomfortable feeling. All of you were kind of like, ew, I don't want to do that. But consider how you do that in your reporting. These are the references for the studies that I talked about us doing in the past year. And we really tried to focus on empathy and culture and reconnecting with these communities and what newsrooms can do. So there's a lot in there that I didn't get to because we had such a short amount of time, and I really wanted you guys to experience this exercise. So go ahead, and I'll leave that up for a second, and But I did want to go back to you guys. So I was listening to these two, and she kept saying, no, that's not a part of your persona. Those are just accessories to it. And you were kind of like, well, they're important to me. So I think that kind of dynamic, don't assume that you know what people carry close to their heart and what they feel like is important. And if you want to contact us, go to this bit.ly. We have a newsletter that we send out with all of our resources 5 times a week. And then you guys can email me and tweet at me and have me come do this in your newsrooms if you want. But thanks for letting me make you guys feel a little uncomfortable today. Do you want back to the last slide? Okay. Now you can applause.